He was only fixing my dress, the tiny zipper snagged stubbornly just below my shoulder blade. His fingers, surprisingly warm, worked at the fabric. His breath, a soft presence on my neck. I stood still in the dim glow of the living room, the late-night movie playing softly on the television, casting flickering shadows on the wall. Michael, my husband, was asleep upstairs, his steady breathing, a familiar comfort through the ceiling. Then his fingers stayed, not moving, not working, just resting lightly on the bare skin of my back, just above the loosened zipper. And I let them. I didn't say yes. I didn't say anything. And that was worse. My name is Sarah. I'm 41, a mother of 2, and a wife of 17 years. My life was to an outsider unremarkable in its quiet contentment. A tidy suburban house, a garden I tended with obsessive care, dinner on the table at 6 predictable rhythms. Michael. My husband was a good man, steady and kind, a creature of habit. We moved through our days like well-oiled gears, efficient, functional, but without much friction or much fire. Somewhere along the way, the sharp edges of passion had dulled, replaced by a comfortable, almost silent companionship. I hadn't realized how starved I was for something more until it was too late. I was adrift in a sea of emotional numbness, a polite smile plastered over a quiet ache I rarely acknowledged even to myself. He was Michael's younger brother, David, 37, newly divorced, and staying in our guest room while he looked for a place of his own. He was quiet, unassuming, with a thoughtful gaze that always seemed to see just a little too much. I'd known David for years, seen him at holidays and family gatherings, a background character in the steady hum of our lives. But now, living under our roof, his presence became a subtle disruption. He'd sit in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee, and just observe. Not in a predatory way, but with a quiet intensity that made me feel for the first time in a long time truly seen. It was a dangerous kind of attention, precisely because it felt so innocent, so unintentional. The guilt was a cold knot that started in my stomach early on, long before his fingers ever touched my skin. It was the guilt of recognizing a nascent desire, a forbidden flutter in my chest every time he walked into a room. It was the shame of craving something that belonged entirely to Michael's world, that was off limits by every unspoken rule of family and loyalty. What if the worst betrayal isn't what you do, but what you let happen? That night in the low light of the living room, with the soft drone of the television filling the air, his fingers resting on my bare back, I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that an irreversible line had been crossed, not by his action, but by my stillness, my non-decision, my silent consent. It was a truth that would haunt me, a secret I carried now, not because of what he did, but because of what I allowed. Some betrayals aren't loud. They're quiet, lingering. If you've ever lived in the guilt of what you allowed, you're not alone. Like and subscribe. Maybe this silence doesn't have to be just yours. My days moved with a quiet precision, each one a careful replica of the last. I'd wake up early before the sun had fully climbed and make my way to my small home office, a room that used to feel like a sanctuary, but now often felt like a cage. The silence there was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I'd sit at my desk, organizing bills, planning meals, sending emails for the volunteer committee I chaired. It was a life built on order and responsibility, a stark contrast to the churning unease that had begun to settle inside me. Michael would eventually stir, and the polite morning rituals would begin. Shared coffee, brief discussions about the day's tasks, a peck on the cheek that felt more like a formality than an expression of affection. There was no anger between us, no overt conflict, just a vast, quiet space where intimacy used to be. I was emotionally numb, a polite smile plastered over a growing sense of emptiness. David's presence in our home amplified that emptiness, even as it paradoxically offered a dangerous glimmer of something else. He was Michael's younger brother, yes, but he carried a quiet intensity that was unsettling. He was staying in our guest room, a temporary fixture in our lives, as he navigated the aftermath of his divorce. He was polite, helpful, always offering to fix things around the house to lend a hand. He never pushed, never overtly flirted, but there was a subtle awareness between us, a shared understanding that felt both illicit and deeply comforting. He'd sometimes join me in the garden, ostensibly to help prune the roses, and we'd work in a comfortable silence, the only sounds the snipping of shears and the distant chirping of birds. But I'd feel his gaze on me, brief, almost accidental, and a flush would creep up my neck. The guilt was a constant companion, a low thrum beneath the surface of my consciousness. It was a preemptive shame, a recognition of the forbidden pull I felt towards him. It wasn't about anything he said or did directly. It was about the way my own body reacted to his proximity, the way my thoughts drifted to him in quiet moments. I'd catch myself replaying a shared glance, a murmured comment searching for hidden meanings, for signals I shouldn't be seeking. It was a betrayal of thought, a quiet transgression that gnawed at me. I told myself it was simply compassion for his situation, nothing more. But the truth, a bitter and unwelcome guest, was that a part of me, a deeply buried, starved part, was awakening to his quiet attention, and I hated myself for it. The quiet understanding between us began to deepen, a subtle shift that felt more dangerous precisely because it was so understated. There were no grand gestures, no overt flirtations, just a slow, almost imperceptible closing of the distance. He'd often join me in the garden, ostensibly to help with the heavier tasks, like turning the soil or moving potted plants, but our conversations would stretch lingering, long after the work was done. He'd talk about his late wife, about the quiet loneliness that had settled into his life, and I'd listen, offering small, empathetic hums of agreement. Sometimes his hand would brush mine, as we reached for the same gardening tool, a light, fleeting contact that sent a shiver through me. I'd pretend it was accidental, pulling my hand back slowly, as if preoccupied, but the warmth of his touch would linger, a ghost sensation on my skin. These casual touches, the prolonged eye contact, the way our shoulders would sometimes brush in a narrow hallway, they started to accumulate, becoming a silent language between us. I'd catch myself noticing the way the sunlight caught the flecks of gold in his eyes, the subtle scent of his skin, when he leaned close to point out a wilting leaf. My chest would tighten, a strange mix of dread and a forbidden thrill. I hated that I noticed. I hated that my body betrayed me with these involuntary responses. I'd chastise myself, reminding myself of Michael, of our life, of all the reasons this was wrong. I'd try to create distance, to make myself busy with tasks whenever he was near, to keep my gaze firmly fixed elsewhere. But it was like trying to hold water in cupped hands. The desire once acknowledged would simply find another way to seep in. I'd be folding laundry in the utility room. The hum of the dryer, a monotonous backdrop, and a stray thought of him would flash through my mind, a memory of his quiet laugh, the comfortable way he leaned against the kitchen counter. It wasn't a burning passion, not yet. It was a soft, insidious warmth that spread through me, making me feel less numb, less invisible. And that was the problem. That was the real danger. It was the insidious comfort he offered, the quiet attention that felt like a balm to my emotionally parched soul. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was a betrayal in thought, if not yet in deed. But the quiet craving for that warmth, that feeling of being truly seen, had begun to overshadow the relentless whisper of guilt. I found myself walking a knife's edge, pretending not to see the abyss, even as I leaned precariously close to the edge. Tea happened on a Tuesday night, a cold, wet evening that mirrored the chill settling in my bones. Michael was working late, a common occurrence, and the house felt vast and empty. I had been attempting to fix a broken clasp on a necklace in my bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, the small, intricate pieces frustrating my tired fingers. David had come up to ask about dinner. Something simple, a silent acknowledgement of the awkwardness of his temporary stay. He saw my struggle with the necklace and without a word came over, sitting beside me. "Let me see," he murmured, his voice low, a soft rumble in the quiet room. He took the delicate chain from my hands. His fingers, larger than mine, but surprisingly nimble, worked at the tiny clasp. I watched him, mesmerized by the quiet intensity of his focus, the gentle brush of his knuckles against my skin as he held the necklace. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with unspoken things. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, the subtle scent of his skin, the rhythm of his breathing. My own breath hitched in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to stand up, to break the suffocating intimacy of the moment. But I didn't. He fixed the clasp, a small, almost inaudible click. But his fingers didn't pull away. They lingered on my wrist, tracing the delicate bones beneath my skin. Then, slowly, deliberately, his thumb brushed the pulse point on my inner wrist, a feather-light touch that sent a tremor through my entire body. My skin prickled, a wave of heat washing over me. I felt the slow, steady beat of my own heart, amplified by the sudden stillness in the room. He didn't look at me, his gaze fixed on my wrist, as if mesmerized by the simple contact. My body was humming a tense coil of forbidden longing and desperate shame. I knew with every fiber of my being that this was wrong, fundamentally, irrevocably wrong. He should have pulled away. I should have moved. I knew better. That didn't help. The silence stretched unbearable, yet I remained perfectly still. A silent, trembling permission. My refusal to move, my quiet stillness, was the surrender. It was the choice. And in that moment, in the soft glow of the bedside lamp, the silence became our undoing. The morning after was a blur of heightened senses and dull, persistent dread. I moved through the house in a fog, every surface, every sound imbued with a new, agonizing significance. The memory of his fingers on my wrist, the stillness of my own body, played on an endless loop in my mind. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it as a momentary lapse, a consequence of loneliness and circumstance, but the justification felt thin, flimsy, crumbling under the weight of the undeniable truth. I had allowed it. I had wanted it. David appeared in the kitchen, ostensibly to make coffee, and the sight of him sent a fresh wave of heat and shame through me. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed, but there was an intensity in his gaze that hadn't been there before. He met my eyes across the kitchen island, a silent acknowledgement passing between us, a shared secret that felt both illicit and terrifyingly real. "You didn't move," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, as he poured himself a mug of coffee. It wasn't a question, but a statement, a simple, brutal truth. My breath hitched. I know. My voice was barely audible. I wanted to deny it, to scream that it was all a mistake, but the words wouldn't come. The truth felt too heavy, too concrete. He took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze never leaving mine. "You should have stopped me." I swallowed hard, the bitter taste of unshed tears in my mouth. I couldn't. The confession was involuntary, a raw slip of honesty I hadn't meant to utter. It felt like tearing open an old wound. And the worst part, the part that twisted the knife in my gut, was the treacherous desire that still hummed beneath the surface. I wanted to rewind time, to erase the moment, to be the dutiful, untouched wife I was supposed to be. But another part, a dark, dangerous part, craved the illicit warmth, the feeling of being truly seen, truly touched, even if it was wrong. I don't know what hurts more, the moment itself or how badly I wanted it again. The quiet tension between us became a constant companion, a thin, fragile thread stretched taut across the everyday. I started avoiding certain rooms, certain times of day, anything that might put me alone with David. The dinner table, once a place of family routine, now felt like a stage where I performed a polite, increasingly strange charade. Michael, bless his unsuspecting heart, seemed to notice only my general preoccupation, attributing it to stress. But the casual glance he'd sometimes cast in my direction, the way his eyes would linger a moment too long, sent a cold spike of fear through me. Had he seen something? Did he suspect? One evening, I was in the hallway putting away laundry, the scent of fresh fabric softener, doing little to calm the frantic beat of my heart. David emerged from his guest room, ostensibly heading to the kitchen. We paused just for a moment in the dim light of the overhead fixture. The silence was thick, heavy, with unspoken words, with the memory of that quiet, forbidden touch. My gaze flitted to his hand, then quickly away, remembering the warmth on my wrist. He saw my discomfort, the quick shift in my eyes. "You're avoiding me," he stated, his voice, a low, flat murmur, devoid of accusation, simply stating a fact. I gripped the laundry basket tighter, my knuckles white. "I have to." The words were barely a whisper, a desperate plea. He nodded slowly, a profound sadness settling in his eyes. "I know." He didn't push, didn't argue. He simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the kitchen. And in that moment, as I watched him go, a fresh wave of guilt washed over me, heavier than any I'd felt before. It wasn't just about the betrayal of my marriage. It was about the quiet pain I was inflicting on him, on myself, by allowing this forbidden connection to linger unspoken and unresolved. The truth pressed down on me a suffocating weight. I've lived with guilt before, but never one I invited by doing nothing at all.